This should be fun.
I respect the fact that he wants to come to Norway. I respect the fact that he wants to learn more about his family.
Sig Hansen never thought he'd come face to face with a living nightmare, but that's exactly what happened in the freezing waters of the Bering Sea. A horrifying creature, like something out of a sci-fi horror film, appeared in their crab pot, leaving his crew stunned and terrified. Let us uncover the shocking truth of what Sig Hansen and his crew saw that day. A discovery so strange, so terrifying, it'll leave you questioning what really lies beneath the waves. An encounter beyond belief. Sig Hansen has seen it all: towering waves, icy storms, and equipment failures. But even with all his years at sea, nothing prepared him for the creepy encounter that shook his whole crew. What they found out there in the freezing waters of the Bering Sea wasn't just strange, it was downright scary. As the icy mist closed in, something moved beneath the waves. Something Sig knew could change everything. It happened during one of their busy crabbing seasons. The crew was doing their usual thing, pulling up heavy crab pots from the deep, cold ocean. It was the kind of day that pushed everyone to their limits. The wind was howling, waves were crashing over the deck, and the cold bit right through their thick jackets. Every second counted because the quota wasn't going to fill itself. They were exhausted, but they kept going, knowing the sea doesn't care if you're tired. As one pot came up, something weird caught their eye. At first, it seemed like a big fish or maybe a seal. Both are normal in those waters, so nobody thought much of it. But then they noticed it wasn't swimming like anything they'd seen before. This thing moved differently, gliding and twisting in a way that made everyone uneasy. When the pot got closer to the surface, they all froze. Whatever it wasn't a seal or a fish. It was something else entirely. The creature, if you could even call it that, looked like it belonged in a sci-fi movie. It had long, wavy limbs, almost like tentacles, but thicker and creepier. Its body shimmered in a way that didn't look natural, almost like it was made of metal. The closer it got, the more uneasy everyone felt. Some of the crew started whispering about old sailor stories, sea monsters, ghosts, and things that don't belong in this world. Even Sig, who'd seen plenty of strange things, couldn't hide how uneasy he was. Then they saw its eyes, if you could even call them that. Two glowing spots stared back at them, faint but steady. It didn't look scared or aggressive, it just stared, almost like it was trying to figure them out. The crew couldn't stop staring either. They knew they were looking at something no one would believe. Some of them felt their skin crawl. Others just stood there, not sure if they should be scared or amazed. The creature wasn't just floating there, it started doing things that felt smart. It moved closer to the pot, wrapping its strange limbs around the metal bars like it was trying to understand what it was. Then it made a sound, a low hum that everyone felt more than heard. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the whole boat like a deep bass note that hits you in the chest. Nobody had a clue what it was or what it meant, but they all agreed it wasn't normal. When news of the encounter leaked, it caused a stir. Scientists, ocean experts, and even UFO hunters wanted to know more. Theories flew around everywhere. Some said it was a weird kind of squid or jellyfish that nobody had documented before. Others went wild with ideas about aliens or secret experiments gone wrong. But no matter how many experts weighed in, nobody could say for sure what it was. The footage they had from the boat didn't help much either. It was too dark and shaky to give a clear look at the creature. All it did was add to the mystery. The one thing everyone agreed on was this: the ocean is still full of surprises. Even with all our technology and knowledge, there's so much we don't know about what lives down there. For Sig and his crew, the encounter was a wake-up call. They'd spent years thinking they'd seen everything the sea had to offer. But this was different. It was a reminder that the ocean is massive, mysterious, and not something you can ever fully understand. Every trip out there is a gamble, and you never know what's waiting just below the surface. Fans of Deadliest Catch went wild over the story. The show, known for its raw look at life on the sea, suddenly had a moment straight out of a thriller. People couldn't stop speculating about the creature. Was it a sea monster, an alien, a new species waiting to be discovered? The mystery added a whole new layer to the show, keeping viewers hooked long after the episode aired. One of the deckhands brought up an old story he'd heard growing up about the Watcher of the Depths, a mythical sea being said to guard the hidden treasures of the ocean floor. Some dismissed it as just a legend, but others couldn't help but wonder if they'd crossed paths with something out of a sailor's tale. Another member suggested that environmental changes could have forced deep-sea creatures closer to the surface. The idea was plausible, but didn't quite fit the creature's strange behavior and metallic-like shimmer. The crew's unease wasn't just from the sight of the creature, it was the way it seemed to interact with them, like it was studying their tools and watching them with intent. That sense of intelligence, alien yet familiar, haunted their thoughts. Even weeks later, some of the men reported dreaming about the creature. It had left an imprint on their minds that was hard to shake. The encounter also led to questions about how much of the ocean remains unexplored. Experts say that over 80% of the world's oceans are still uncharted. For the crew, that statistic suddenly felt very real. They'd spent countless days and nights hauling crab pots, braving storms, and navigating treacherous waters, yet they'd barely scratched the surface of what was out there. Fans of the show became amateur detectives, poring over every detail of the episode that featured the encounter. Online forums exploded with debates and theories. Some viewers insisted it had to be a deep-sea creature brought to the surface due to underwater volcanic activity. Others were convinced it was a new kind of life form altogether. The buzz around the incident made it one of the most talked-about moments in the show's history. Back on land, Sig found himself fielding endless questions from journalists and fans alike. People wanted answers, but he didn't have any. He kept his responses measured, emphasizing the mystery of the encounter while steering clear of wild speculation. He'd built his reputation on being level-headed and wasn't about to jeopardize that by jumping to conclusions. Yet he couldn't deny the profound impact the event had on him. It had reminded him of the vast, untamed nature of the sea and how little humanity truly knows about the world beneath the waves. It started as a normal day at sea, but soon they saw something they'd never forget. A haul to remember. As weeks turned into months, the mystery deepened. Scientists continued their research, publishing papers and sharing their findings with the world. Theories about the object's origin became more elaborate. Some suggested it was a fragment of a long-lost civilization, evidence of advanced technology that predates recorded history. Others speculated it was extraterrestrial, a piece of a spacecraft that had fallen to Earth and been hidden beneath the waves for centuries. Despite the excitement, there were no definitive answers. The object remained in mystery, a puzzle that refused to be solved. For the crew of the Deadliest Catch, it was a constant reminder of the ocean's secrets. They'd always known the sea was unpredictable, but this discovery had shown them just how little they truly understood. The return trips to the fishing grounds were different now. The crew worked with the same efficiency, the same determination, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air. Each time they set out, they couldn't help but wonder if they'd find something else, another piece of the puzzle that was the glowing object. The ocean, as always, kept its secrets close. Fishing is a tough business, demanding physical strength, mental fortitude, and a willingness to face danger head-on. The crew knew this all too well. Their days were long, their nights often sleepless, and the cold was relentless. But they also knew the rewards, the satisfaction of a full hold, the pride of a job well done, and the knowledge that they were part of a tradition that stretched back generations.
That's pretty good. That's some big pots.
Oh my God. I'm counting it. Woo!
The glowing object had added a new layer to their lives. It was a story they'd tell for years to come, a moment that had set them apart from every other fishing crew on the Bering Sea. It was a reminder that even in a world as harsh and unforgiving as the ocean, there's still room for wonder, curiosity, and discovery. As they prepared for another season, the crew couldn't help but think about what the future might hold. The sea is vast, its depths largely unexplored. Who knows what else might be down there, waiting to be found? The glowing object was just one mystery in a world full of them, a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And for the crew of the Deadliest Catch, that was enough to keep them coming back, season after season, ready to face whatever the ocean decided to throw their way. The fishermen of the Bering Sea were no strangers to the extraordinary. Every trip out to sea came with its own dose of chaos. Crabs that wouldn't bite, waves taller than their boats, and the constant fight against the freezing wind. But this time, they brought back something that left even the hardiest of them scratching their heads. It started like any other haul. The pots were heavy, the crew was grumbling, and the crabs were plentiful. But as they emptied one particular pot, something clattered onto the deck that wasn't a crustacean. It was a chunk of metal, smooth and polished, with strange symbols etched all over its surface. Nobody knew what to make of it, but everyone knew one thing: it didn't belong there. By the time they docked back at Dutch Harbor, the story had already started spreading. The Deadliest catch crew found something weird, people whispered at the docks. The crew was tired but restless, their minds spinning with what they'd pulled up. It wasn't treasure, not in the gold and silver sense, but it felt important. Captain Jonathan made the call to keep the object under wraps, at least for now. It was stashed away in the shipyard, covered with a tarp and guarded from curious eyes. But secrecy only added fuel to the fire. Locals, reporters, and even rival fishermen swarmed Dutch Harbor, desperate to get a glimpse. Theories ran wild. Some claimed it was part of an old shipwreck, maybe a relic from a long-lost voyage. Others said it had fallen from space, a piece of a satellite, or the more imaginative, a UFO. The symbols on the object were unlike anything anyone had seen before. They weren't letters, not in any language the experts knew. They weren't random scratches either. They looked deliberate, as if they were meant to tell a story. As the days passed, the unease among the crew grew. They couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something that should have stayed hidden. The object seemed almost alive, like it was watching them, waiting. Nights at the shipyard grew eerier, the strange artifact casting long, unexplainable shadows under the dim lights. One night, as a storm battered Dutch Harbor, Captain Jonathan found himself drawn back to the shipyard. Rain pelted his jacket as he pulled the tarp off the object, running his fingers over the smooth, glowing surface. The markings seemed to shift under his touch, almost like they were trying to speak to him. He stood there for what felt like hours, the howling wind around him fading into the background. The rest of the crew wasn't faring much better. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought strange dreams. Images of endless oceans, towering waves, and those same glowing symbols. They couldn't escape it, not on land, not at sea. The object had wormed its way into their minds. Experts were called in. Scientists, historians, even a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator. Each had their own theory, but none could explain the object's origin. The symbols didn't match any known language. The metal wasn't like anything found on Earth. And then there was the weight of it, far heavier than it looked, almost as if it were holding a piece of the sea itself. Theories turned from curious to outright bizarre. Was it a message from another world? A piece of technology from an ancient, advanced civilization? Or just some odd, man-made object that ended up in the wrong place? The lack of answers only deepened the mystery. Some of the crew started to regret bringing it aboard. "Maybe we should have just left it down there," one of them muttered during a rare quiet moment at the local bar. The others nodded, sipping their drinks in uneasy silence. The ocean was vast and full of secrets. Maybe this was one they weren't meant to uncover, but curiosity had a way of digging in. Despite their reservations, the crew couldn't leave it alone. They made trips to the shipyard, running their hands over the strange object, hoping for some kind of answer. Instead, they got more questions. The object started changing, its glow growing brighter, its surface warmer to the touch. It felt alive. Then one day, a stranger arrived in Dutch Harbor. He wasn't a fisherman. His clean suit and polished shoes made that clear. He introduced himself as an investigator, someone who specialized in unusual finds. Word had spread farther than they'd thought, and now outsiders were coming to see for themselves. Captain Jonathan was reluctant, but eventually agreed to show him the object. The investigator's face remained neutral as he studied it, taking notes and muttering under his breath. When he finally left, he offered no answers, only a cryptic promise to be in touch. His visit left the crew even more uneasy. What did he know that he wasn't sharing? Life seemed to return to normal, but the crew knew this was far from over. Secrets of the Bering Sea. After that, things only got stranger. People started watching the shipyard, locals, reporters, and a few faces that didn't belong to either group. The crew began to feel like they were being followed, their every move scrutinized. The object had become a magnet for attention, and not all of it was welcome. Weeks turned into months, and the crew's lives never quite returned to normal. They went back to fishing, but the object was always in the back of their minds. It was a weight, an unanswered question they couldn't shake. And deep down, they all knew one thing: whatever it wasn't finished with them. The sea had given them a mystery, and mysteries have a way of demanding answers. Whether they liked it or not, the fishermen of the Deadliest catch were now part of a story far bigger than they'd ever imagined. Each new trip to sea felt different, weighed down by what they'd left back at Dutch Harbor. The rhythm of their work, the cranking of the winches, the sloshing of seawater on the deck felt less familiar, as if the ocean itself had shifted. They tried to focus, pulling up pots and sorting crabs, but their minds always drifted back to the object. Jonathan especially couldn't let it go. Every night he found himself returning to the shipyard, standing in the quiet darkness, staring at the strange artifact. He noticed changes, subtle shifts in the glow, new patterns emerging on its surface. It felt like the object was trying to communicate, though he couldn't begin to guess what it was saying. The crew started to notice changes in themselves too. Little things at first: a heightened awareness, sharper senses, an uncanny ability to predict the weather or the movements of the sea. Then came the dreams, vivid and unrelenting, of places they'd never seen and creatures they couldn't name. They stopped talking about it openly, afraid of what it might mean, but the tension among them was palpable. Dutch Harbor began to change as well. The town felt more crowded, more watched. Strangers appeared more frequently, some openly asking questions about the object, others lurking in the shadows. The crew's family started to notice too, asking why reporters were hanging around their homes, why men in suits were parked down the street. One evening, as Jonathan walked to the shipyard, he saw headlights in the distance. A black car idled near the fence, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. He hesitated but continued on, pulling the tarp off the object and running his hand over its surface. The glow was stronger now, pulsing faintly under his touch. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone to approach, but the car stayed where it was. The next day, the car was gone, but new rumors had started spreading. Some said the government was involved, that they wanted to take the object for themselves. Others claimed it was cursed, that the crew had brought something back that would doom them all. Jonathan dismissed the rumors, but the weight of them lingered. The object's changes became more pronounced. It began to emit a faint hum, barely audible but impossible to ignore. The glow grew brighter at night, casting eerie patterns on the walls of the shipyard. The crew's unease turned to fear, but they couldn't bring themselves to get rid of it. It felt like it belonged to them now, like they were meant to guard it. As the weeks stretched on, Jonathan made a decision. He called a meeting with the crew, laying everything out on the table. They needed answers, and they couldn't wait for someone else to provide them. They would take the object back out to sea, back to where they'd found it, and see if the ocean held any clues. The day they set out was clear and cold, the kind of weather that sharpened the senses. The crew worked silently, their movements purposeful. The object was secured on deck, glowing faintly under the sunlight. Jonathan stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't know what they would find, but he felt a strange sense of purpose, as if they were finally on the right path. When they reached the spot where they'd found the object, the sea was unnaturally calm. The crew lowered it over the side, watching as it disappeared into the depths. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to churn, glowing faintly where the object had sunk. The crew stared, transfixed, as a column of light shot up from the ocean, illuminating the night sky. The light was blinding, and the hum they'd heard before grew louder, resonating through the boat. Jonathan felt his heart race as the symbols from the object appeared in the light, spinning and shifting, forming patterns that seemed to speak directly to him. He couldn't understand the message, but he felt it, a deep, primal connection to something far greater than himself. When the light finally faded, the sea was calm again. The object was gone, and the crew stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. Jonathan turned to his crew, seeing the same awe and fear reflected in their eyes. Whatever had just happened, it had changed them. They were no longer just fishermen, they were part of something much larger. The journey back to Dutch Harbor was quiet. The crew spoke little, each lost in their thoughts. When they docked, the town was waiting, eager for answers, but the crew had none to give. The object was gone, but its impact lingered, etched into their minds and hearts. As the weeks turned to months, the crew tried to return to normal, but the experience had left its mark. They couldn't forget the light, the symbols, the feeling of connection. The ocean was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of mystery, a reminder of how much they didn't know. Jonathan found himself returning to the spot where they'd left the object, staring out at the water and wondering what it all meant. He knew they'd been part of something extraordinary, something they might never fully understand, and though the object was gone, its presence remained, a quiet reminder of the secrets the sea still held. The fishermen of the Bering Sea had always been resilient, but now they carried with them a deeper understanding of the world's mysteries. They had faced the unknown and returned, forever changed by what they had seen. And as they continued their work, pulling crabs from the depths, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the ocean might reveal. It started like any other day on the frigid waters of the Bering Sea. The fishermen, rugged and worn from years of battling waves and hauling nets, weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. They were out to catch crab, not make history. But as fate would have it, the sea had a surprise waiting for them, something that would flip their world upside down. The crew was curious, but also wary. They hauled it onto the deck, careful not to damage their equipment or themselves. The thing was smooth and cold to the touch, with faint grooves and symbols etched across its surface. It didn't look man-made, at least not by any man they'd ever known. They stood there staring, unsure of what to do next. Jonathan, the captain, decided they couldn't just leave it behind. He made the call to bring it back to the shipyard. It felt important, like they'd stumbled onto something that shouldn't be ignored. And big it was, maybe too big. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to take a turn they never signed up for. When they docked, the shipyard seemed eerily quiet, but it didn't stay that way for long. Soon, dark cars started showing up, parking across the street like vultures circling a carcass. Men in suits watched from a distance, pretending to be inconspicuous, but failing miserably. The crew noticed, and unease settled over them like a heavy fog. It felt like they were being watched, like someone was keeping tabs on them, and not in a friendly way. Jonathan's gut told him they'd messed with something they shouldn't have. He couldn't help but wonder if they should have just left the object where they found it, deep beneath the waves. But it was too late now. The thing was out of the ocean and sitting right there, drawing attention they didn't want. The crew tried to go about their business, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was like a shadow that clung to them no matter where they went. As days passed, the strange object became harder to ignore. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a problem. The crew argued about what to do. Some wanted to get rid of it, to dump it back into the sea and wash their hands of the whole mess. Others felt like they had a duty to figure out what it was, to see this through to the end. After all, they'd pulled it from the deep. Wasn't it their responsibility to uncover its secrets? The days that followed were tense. The crew stuck to themselves, keeping the object hidden and avoiding unnecessary attention. Yet the sensation of being watched never went away. It gnawed at their nerves, a persistent unease that made even the bravest among them jump at shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound outside their windows felt like a threat. The next day, a team arrived. They didn't waste any time. They loaded the object onto a truck and drove off without so much as a hint of where they were taking it. The crew watched in silence as it disappeared down the road, a mix of relief and regret washing over them. They'd been part of something extraordinary, something that would stick with them forever, but now it was out of their hands. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could get after something like that. The crew went back to fishing, back to the sea they knew so well, but the memory of the object lingered. Late at night, under the stars, they'd talk about it, wondering where it came from, what it was, and what would happen to it now. They knew they'd probably never get the answers they wanted, but they also knew they'd been part of something special. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Who decides what secrets stay hidden and who gets to uncover the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.